Hello and welcome to Personable, a podcast focused on speaking to the world's best, enabling you to become the best you can be. My name is HarveyBracken-Smith, and today I am honored to be joined by myself. In fact, this is the first out of the 30 plus podcasts that I've filmed where it's actually just me talking to you. I apologize if I'm looking down, looking around, pausing. That isn't me just collecting my thoughts, trying to get them across to you in the best way possible. So I want to set you on a story of my life. In fact, this is probably the hardest story to tell because every story I've been able to tell so far has been me exploring the story of someone else, being able to nitpick and ask any question I'd like, to be able to get the best insights from them possible to learn how to be the world's best in their given field. So you may wonder, Harvey, why even bother doing a solo podcast? You're only 20 years old, you haven't built that billion-dollar company yet, become that world-famous singer or artist or professor at university. So why would we want to even listen to you? Well, my answer to that would be as follows. I look up to many of the great podcasters, three of which come to mind. The first one being Joe Rogan of the Joe Rogan Experience, Chris Williamson with the Modern Wisdom podcast, and Stephen Bartlett of Diary of a CEO. Each of these had their own benefits as to why, in my opinion, they're three of the greats. Joe Rogan is the father of modern day podcasting, getting tens of millions of views and in fact /listens, and he's probably the most famous podcaster out of all of them. Chris Williamson has taken a more aesthetic approach to the world of podcasting, creating the best effects possible, creating a very chiseled lighting, making his face look very chiseled, and whether it's online or in-person podcast he has, the aesthetics look incredible. And Diary of a CEO, Stephen Bartlett, perhaps even the one that got me into podcasting at the beginning, is just taking a more entrepreneurial approach to the world of podcasting. Podcasting, in my opinion, and I'm sure in theirs, is not just an audio form of content. It is a video production in which they are pumping tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of pounds or dollars, or however you look at it, into their piece of content. They're highly engaging trailers, looking at when you watch, when you listen, when you drop off. All of this is now a business in and of itself. In fact, people like Joe Rogan are probably earning $1 million plus for each episode they do. So that's just to give you a bit of perspective on it. So then I still haven't answered the question of why. Why am I doing this episode? Well, if you were to have a guest, let's say some actress or athlete or some person that is likely at the top of their field, they've probably been on Joe Rogan. They've probably been on Chris Williamson, Diary of a CEO, amongst other podcasts. And sure, if you are a super fan of this person, you might watch their episode across platforms. But at the end of the day, you're only likely to listen to one. You don't need to hear the same story over and over again. So that a key differentiator is the host themselves. And so all of these people are already incredibly well off, incredibly, they're at the top of their fields. They've got teams. They're all amazing. So why the hell would anyone want to listen to me? And so I wanted to produce this episode, amongst others, to show off who I am and why you should listen to me over listening to them. So I want to take you on the journey of my life and that you might find interesting to see if I'm the one that you think could help best convey their stories. In fact, a bit about me right now. I'm 20 years old. I'm currently studying at Duke University in the United States, and I'm a graduate of Eton College, a school in the UK. I am deeply curious, and I think the deep curiosity is what fuels my interest in wanting to learn from these amazing people. I am someone that's incredibly hardworking, incredibly ambitious, and who wants to get to the places of which these people are at. So who could be a better candidate than myself to be able to ask them questions? I mean, if you've got someone that wants to be where they are, I feel like they would ask questions that would enable them in order to figure out why and how they got there. In fact, on the surface, you may think that I have speakers ranging from athletes to entrepreneurs to CEOs, to billionaires and whatnot. And how does this create any relevancy? But it's actually, I have a theory that by learning the mindsets of where someone is, from where they started out in their childhood to how they got there, to where they are now, and to where they're headed, there's commonalities between an actress, an athlete, a billionaire, a professor, someone that's trying to get there, in the mindsets, the lessons learned, and what they've done in order to get into those positions. And that's what I'm really trying to uncover on my podcast Personable. It is now Thursday, the 10th of October. I'm sure you're probably watching this a few days after it's been put out. But the reason I mention that date is it has now been 2 years, 1 month, and 28 days probably 700 plus days since I initially started, where I actually made this episode that you're listening to now. You may think that's a very weird thing to say, but I actually thought of the idea for Personable and what I want it to be a long time ago, something of which I will talk about in more detail another time. But this time, it's the 12th of August, 2022. I was supposed to start at Duke University, what would become my dream university a few days later, when I was at a music festival with some of my best friends at home. In theory, everything should have been perfect. But unfortunately, my mum had been battling cancer over the past year, and I found out a month prior that she had now had incurable cancer, whatever that meant, as I thought at the time. And I hadn't been able to properly process it whilst also dealing with my own burnout in my life. And I'd had the idea for Personable, which again, I shall talk about in the next episode of this more personal series, or more personable series, as I like to call it. But I decided to put out a podcast episode. I thought I've got this amazing concept for this podcast and what it could be and what I want it to be. And I don't think it matters what this initial episode sounds like, but I can use it as a basis to grow from there and then to make better podcasts moving forward. And what it actually turned out to be was this hour of me rambling at my most burnt out, my most tired, my most upset state. But I wanted to share it with the world because for two reasons. One, I wanted to get it out and move on and actually get this podcast in the works. And the second reason is that I wasn't in a good place in my own part in my life. And so having posted that podcast, which was taken down a few hours later, I realized that I wasn't ready to start and follow my dreams in the US. In fact, I realized that I needed to spend a year with my terminally ill mother, the final year of her life, and in fact, what was the best decision of my entire life. So one would think, why would I even talk about that? The reason I talk about that in such a public forum is because I think that gives means for me to connect to like-minded people who have gone through similar experiences, but also to give you a reason to want to maybe connect with me, to follow my journey and let me follow yours as we embark on this journey to become the best that we can be. In fact, the phrase, be the best you can be, the whole preface and the whole idea and whole, main construct behind this podcast is one of the two phrases that my mum would say to me the whole time. Be the best you can be. What does that mean? Be the best you can be. Be the best you can be does not mean you need to be an Olympian or winning some sort of prize as an athlete or as a professor, a Nobel Prize or winning an Oscar. No, that's not what it means. Being the best you can be. It doesn't say be the best you can be. It means to be the best given your circumstances. So in my circumstances at that point in time, it was a case of how can I be the best I can be? I can't be the best I can be going away 5,000 or however miles it is over to the United States to follow my own dreams. Being the best I could be at that time was being a brother and being a son and being there for my family, not only to help them, but also for more, selfish reasons, to spend as much time with my mum before she passed away. So that is the main, theory and main reason behind that podcast. And if you feel like you've got it already, then feel free to click off. But I'm now going to take you on the story of my life. So my full name is Harvey Joseph Peter Bracken-Smith. Harvey being the name my parents gave me, rather obviously. Joseph, the name of my mum's dad, my grandfather, and Peter being from my confirmation. The name Bracken-Smith seems very strange. In fact, one might think that I'm some form of lord or whatnot. Unfortunately, I do not live in a castle. However, if you have one that you want to give away to me for free, feel free. My dad is from England and my mum is from Ireland. And in fact, a month before my parents were getting married, my mum thought that the name Smith was not a name that she wanted to take on. And so she tried to convince my dad to take on the name Bracken. But you can imagine how that went down. My dad staying as Peter Smith and my mum taking on the name Bracken-Smith, forming this new double-barreled surname that I and my three younger siblings carry on today. So I was born in Jersey. So if you don't know what Jersey is, it's this little island in the Channel Islands, right next to France, but English owned. It's 9 miles by 5 miles, originally owned by France and then taken by the British. And then during the World War II, it was captured, one of the only pieces of British territory to be captured by the Germans. But yeah, I was born there. Being from a tiny little island such as that, I'm sure smaller than many of the towns that a lot of you live in these days, it didn't really feel that strange. I mean, when you've got nothing else to compare something like that to, it feels normal. I absolutely loved growing up in Jersey. The weather was mild, perhaps a few degrees warmer than in the UK. Um, I have three amazing siblings: Freddie, Max, and Georgie. Two younger brothers and a little sister. Each equally, well, perhaps even more athletic than me. Very ambitious, very active, and so I'd always have fun things to do with them after school and on the weekends. Fortunately, sport and we are a big sporty family, so we'd be able to finish school and play rugby, tennis, football, soccer as they call it in the US, like 3 or 4 things within a day, because everything would only be about 10, 15 minutes apart. Also had a very close relationship with my cousins and grandparents, all being on the island, which was amazing. This island mentality or community gave me a very form basis for community of love and whatnot, of people very close to me from a young age. But as I grew older, even up to the age of about 8 or 9, I realized that, hey, I am on an island. Like maybe this isn't the norm. This is very strange. Um, it was only really when playing sport against other kids, and I would see the same kid at rugby, as at tennis, as at golf, as at whatever. And then as we went on year and year and year, there were no new kids. It was just the same kids playing over and over again. And athletically wise, I think I was pretty decent, pretty good at quite a few sports. And so it was quite hard once you got past a certain stage in order to really push yourself past your athletic, um, you know, past your athletic capabilities. Because if there's no competition, then how are you really going to get better? And that's a big motivation for a charity that my family and I are starting, which we can talk about later on. I also loved going in the sea, having the sea around me, which become a blessing if you listen to that episode, talking about my mum. But most importantly, this idea of community was a very important thing in all our lives. I think community is something that's lacking with the rise of social media, individualism, and a tendency to be away from each other in times such as these and keep to ourselves. It's funny that I'm saying this, talking to a camera in my room by myself. But I think I had a very strong form of community growing up, which has served me very well throughout my teenage and now into my adult years. My parents had a very strong emphasis, as I mentioned, on being the best you can be, but also enabling us to be our best selves. I don't think my parents have ever really told us what we did or didn't have to do. It's always very much been a case of trying to figure out what our passions are and then how we can get there. They've never been restrictive, always enabling. And I think that mindset of my parents of enabling us to try things, and, I've tried coding, I've tried every sport under the sun, I've tried lots of different academic subjects, have pushed me and enabled me to become the person I am today. No, neither of my parents told me to or not to start something like this podcast series. And, this is providing me with new opportunities, new learnings, and connecting with me to some of the best people on the planet every single day. Having had this experience growing up in Jersey, and I still think about it positively, and I still live there and love the island, and it still has a warm place in my heart. One of, if not the biggest thing that happened in my life, in my younger childhood years, was the passing of my best friend, Oscar. So maybe when I was about 6, 7 years old, I had this friend who was called Oscar. I'd known him literally since birth. My parents and his parents were very close friends. And I was in PE one day, physical education class, whatever you want to call it, and we were doing cross country. And although I was very good at cross country, I absolutely hated cross country. And I remember, being slow and trying to put on my kit and tie my shoes incredibly slowly, ready, trying to delay as much time as I could before getting out on the field. And I see Oscar not putting on his athletics kit. I was really just like perplexed, like what was going on. So I asked, like, Oscar, what's going on? And he said, oh, well, my mum's taking me home from school early. And I was almost jealous at the time. I was like, how come Oscar gets to go home? I'm only 6, 7 at the time. How come Oscar gets to go home early? He's so lucky. But then it started to happen over and over and over again. Oscar kept, missing PE class, started taking out school early. And even, I'd never really experienced death or anything even like it. But, there were some alarm bells going off in my mind of like, where was my friend going? Um, but still, I was completely innocent and didn't understand anything at the time. But I spent more and more time with him, and I started to notice that my parents started to take me to his house after school. And me being an incredibly active kid that loves moving around and doing stuff the whole time. In fact, it's surprising I'm able to sit down for an hour doing podcasts these days when I used to not be able to sit down that much at all when I was, wanting to do stuff the whole time. But that's very much the kid I was. I just loved doing things the whole time. And so to suddenly do that and spend all my time playing sport, talking about sport, being active, to doing more sedentary activities that one would expect to do with, your 80 or 19-year-old grandparents or whatever. It was a very strange thing to me. And I didn't understand that Oscar was ill. I just didn't know. I didn't really know what was going on. But my parents took me, and I trust them and trusted them. So I continued to go. So I would go to his house after school a few times a week, play with him. Clash of Clans was the big game at the time. Again, he'd have all the gems. He was a rush builder. He would buy a load of gems, and I'd be very jealous as to how he'd managed to get ahead of that. But then it started to get really serious. I mean, this friend, Oscar still looked like and had been Oscar. But then, he started to get thin. He started not to be able to walk. Even his voice changed. He started to go off to America. I mean, being from this little island and, not even going to England, but suddenly America, it's like, geez, it's a big deal. I just wanted my best friend back. I mean, I'd spent so much time, didn't know this, but loving him and caring for him and enjoying spending time with him, to suddenly, not being able to do the things that, young kids want to do with each other. And I had a pretty serious phobia of like needles at the time. And being scared of other things that young kids might be afraid of. And I remember being on the phone to him one time, and I'm at my grandparents, and he's on the phone. I'm like, oh, it's Oscar. Oh, hi, Oscar. How's it going? He's like, hey, Harvey, I'm in America. Oh, Oscar, how's America? He's like, I got to do this. I got to do this. I got to do this. I was like, oh, that's really cool, man. And then he's like, yeah, so I'm having an operation tomorrow. And I was like, operation? What do you mean I'm having an operation? He's like, yeah. They're going to cut into my head. I was like, they're going to cut into your head? What do you mean they're going to cut into your head? And he's like, yeah, I've got to get this cancer out of my head. Blah, blah, blah. And I was thinking to myself, oh my gosh, like, to have to go through something like that horrific. I was just like sick to my stomach that he would have to go through something so horrific like that. But as time went on, he got worse. His parents were very open to me about the process. But still, I just had no idea what was going on. And it's hard to be empathetic about a situation when you've never experienced anything like it before. And I remember one day after leaving Oscar's house, my dad was driving, and he pulled me off the side of the road. And he said to me, Harvey, and he goes through this long story trying to explain this idea of like heaven and hell to me. Not heaven and hell, but this idea of some afterlife. And he was like, when blah, blah, blah happens and they go to heaven and whatnot. And it just didn't click to me. I just had no idea what he was on about. He was like, yeah, and Oscar's not going to be with us forever. And I was like, did not understand. I just couldn't understand the concept of having something. I've lost toys in the past, I've lost sports matches or whatever, but nothing so serious or permanent. It's just very much a case of just get up, go again, try again, whatever. So to be told I was going to lose someone, let alone someone so important to me, let alone my best friend, it was just this incredibly confusing thing to me. And perhaps a few weeks later, I was having a sleepover with my brother and my cousin. We were playing in my room, and my mum shouts to me on the stairs, and she's like, Harvey, come downstairs, I need to talk to you. And I'm like, no, Mum, like, I'm in the middle of the game, blah, blah, blah. She said, no, Harvey, I need to come. So I'm like, okay. So I walk outside, and I don't know what it was, but I could just feel the gravity. I could feel the emotions in the air. And I see my mum walk up the stairs, and in what was probably the most upset I've ever seen her in my life, I see her and suddenly I just feel on the same emotional level as her. I just feel, oh my God, like what's happened? And she takes me to her arms and gives me a massive squeeze. And she tells me, Oscar's gone to heaven. And from having not understood anything of what had gone on up to that point, it suddenly clicked that everything my dad had said and having seen that my best friend wasn't around any longer. And honestly, that was the worst moment in my life. I mean, losing him and not being able to understand what death was, to losing someone so close to me, it was horrific. And I think I spent many months, in fact, many years following that, beating myself up for it, those feelings of jealousy and not understanding what was really going on. And I share this story not as a form of therapy. I mean, it's been, 11 years since that time. So I've had a lot of time to think about it, but rather to share the story to other people, to know like the things that I've experienced as a way to realize that you're not alone when those sort of things are happening. Because I think in that moment, it felt so unique. I mean, I'd known no one that had gone through something similar, and it being someone so young, I just didn't know how to think. I mean, I really beat myself up for it. And it took a lot of time of understanding that it wasn't my fault, but all I could do and all I had done and all I'd successfully done was be the best friend that I could be for Oscar. And so life has gone on and I'm still living and breathing and making the most of every day. But Oscar's still very close to my heart, and the lessons and joy that he had and being that angel on my shoulders every day is something I've taken with me every day since. Another key thought and thing that's impacted the person I am today is my entrepreneurial journey. So growing up, I've always thought I'm a very entrepreneurial person. I thought this was an innate part of my personality, but having looked back, both my parents and many of my uncles, aunts, and people around me all seem to have their own businesses. And so what seemed like this thing that I'd come to myself may have actually just been the influence of those around me. So around the time of maybe 2016, 2017, there was this brand called Supreme. If you don't know what Supreme is, it's this brand that would release clothing every Thursday at 11 a.m. It would change depending on the time zones. It'd be 11 a.m., GMT in the UK, Paris, Eastern time for New York. It would be 11 a.m. for each of these. And they would release a limited amount of clothing, perhaps, 12 items, of which one or two would be really really sought after. And they would sell out. After a certain amount of time, these would all sell out. And I remember one of my friends talking about this, like, oh, this is Frankel Supreme. And I was like, no, no, no. And then I was like, oh, if I can work out how to buy these items, then I can sell it for more money. All right. I mean, I didn't really know that was an actual business model at the time, but I just thought that would be a cool thing to do. And so that's what I did. I learned the idea of how to buy really quickly, getting really good, using copy and pasting on notes on my computer or on my phone, or getting really quick past the processes, or using certain online algorithms or tools to be able to do it. In fact, I tried to get my mum's PA at work to sometimes try and buy these clothes for me. But I got really good at that, and before I didn't really use much social media at the time, but there was this business called Depop, which was like an online selling thing in which you could sell clothes on. And I built up a couple thousand followers on that, just reselling clothes. So I did pretty well for myself, relatively, for a 10-year-old kid. And then on top of that, I realized that there was no way for brands in Jersey to be able to access these clothes. And so what was perhaps a modern day arbitrage, which is pretty cool to be able to say, is I would buy the clothes, get them in, and then I actually had like a little in-store partnership, like a little rail in this premium menswear store, which I think it's gone now, but it used to be called Roulette in Jersey. So I had this little rail downstairs, and then I'd add my markups and they'd add theirs. and I did multiple pop-up shops and whatnot. But it went really well. And I also every kid and their mum under the sun wanted Supreme at the time. And so it was very easy for me to be able to sell these clothes when the demand was so high. But that was sort of my first entrepreneurial venture. Since then, I've got about 1 billion ideas in the sun. If you ever stole my phone and went through my notes, you'd probably find them all. You'd probably think they were very random, so I wouldn't do it. I think you'd need me as well to be able to build it for you. But I've had all these ideas, and it's just something that I've always wanted to do, but haven't necessarily had the time. Tried to learn how to trade stocks, and I've done that. And then on top of that, I had this idea for a business I wanted to build when I was like 16, 17, going into my lower sixth, sort of junior year of high school. And the idea, I'm non-technical, so I needed technical people to help me. So I found 2 scholars from my school, and one of which had been on and came 4th in Child Genius. So you can probably find out who that is if you do enough online digging. But the problem is that their incentives didn't align. So my incentive was build this app, be really successful, blah, 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 blah. And for them, I'd give them a little bit of equity, but I wasn't paying them. But I realized that unless I put enough goals in mind, unless the incentives align, nothing's going to get built. And so following that, I then took my year off and whatnot. And I still have that entrepreneurial drive and passion in my life. In fact, even this podcast could be deemed as some form of entrepreneurial venture in the way that I'm building it. But again, I'll talk about that another time. But I think that's my life goal, is to build my own business. I'm not sure what realm and how that looks like, but that is the goal for me. So going back, following that time after Oscar died, I'm like 10 years old, and I start to look at senior schools. And I hope this can provide some help for kids also going through the process, because I remember it being so, it was so like, not like, no, unless you like know someone having gone to those schools, it's very hard to sort of know how to get in. And neither of my parents had gone to any schools even like or comparable to Eton. And so they really had no idea, how to get in. In fact, many schools like Radley, another good school in the UK, it was a case of just put your name down at birth and then you'd get in. I mean, somewhat, what, you just put your name down, whoever's first gets in. It's just this crazy, they had these crazy systems. And my parents thought, our kid's somewhat smart, let's just, let's help him as much as we can, give him the confidence to do his best, to be the best he can be, and give it a shot. And I think that's the mentality I've had throughout all of my life, that my parents have instilled into me, to try things. And if it's not meant to be, it's not meant to be. But if it is, it is. And any school, any place is lucky to have me, as they would say, and any place is lucky to have you as well. And so it gives you this confidence to try things and to not be afraid of rejection, because, that person, that interaction, that institutional business is lucky to have you. So what did applying to Eton look like? It was a case of I had to do these tests, I had to be interviewed, I had to have references from school. So I did that. I was very involved, played every sport under the sun, played 2 instruments, singing and trumpet, like captain of rugby, football, like tennis. I played hockey, captain of cross country, as well as doing very well academically. But I did that process. I also applied to schools like Harrow, Tunbridge and Wellington. But I think at the end of the day, Eton was the one I wanted to go to, because it is the standard of education in the UK. I mean, 20 prime ministers have gone to Eton, including Prime Ministers Boris Johnson and David Cameron. The royal family have gone there, Prince William and Prince Harry. And so it's really seen as the best of the best. And so that's why I wanted to go there. And so when I got in, I was over the moon. But there was this big transitional period when I actually decided, or when I actually went to the school. A lot of my other friends from school either stayed on the island or decided to go to other schools, perhaps of less academic rigor. And so it was really a case of me thinking, I'm going to this school and they're all going to be full of weirdos that are really smart, but, I'm not going to have any fun or like anyone around me. So I thought at least I can maybe convince to buy some of my clothes, because I thought they were all just going to be really rich and disconnected from the rest of the world. So I went to school, and I had been one of the best at sport on my island in my school, one of the best academically, just suddenly receiving the biggest shock of my life that HarveyBracken-Smith was not and is not the best at everything, and it is impossible to be that. Being the best at everything, or at least trying to be, is only a realization that I had perhaps 5 years later. But I still tried to be the best, and I got a big shock having been captain and being in the island for rugby, being dropped to the B to the D team. Other things like academics, I started off in all the top sets to suddenly, dropping down and not doing well as I previously thought I would have. And I think I had this deep insecurity in myself, because I'm suddenly around all these people that are incredibly smart and are the best from their own communities, and people that have got more money than I've even imagined, or people that have, not had all the, people that have come from some of the most, the least fortunate places in the world, but have all come there out of their own merits. And so I probably had imposter syndrome at that young age. And I found it very hard to navigate through that. Everyone around you seemingly making me feel like they were much better than me. And not really having the confidence to show up and be myself and be my authentic self and really follow my passions, trying to do things because I thought I should do them rather than because I wanted to do them. And especially when sport is such a pivotal part in my life, dropping down in all those teams really, really hurt my ego, and my self-esteem and my confidence and overall happiness. I gained weight. I probably lost a bit of touch with myself and what it means to be Harvey and to be happy and to be healthy, both mentally and physically. And I was still worrying and still upset about Oscar, even though it happened 3-4 years prior. As time went on, though, I continued to immerse myself into Eton life. Being surrounded by such brilliant people that day in, day out really made me want to be the best that I could be, even though it was incredibly academically rigorous and hard, and I'd work my ass off 7 days a week. It just is and was what it was, and it made me become a better version of myself. Fast forward from 2017 to 2020, the COVID pandemic hit. I was supposed to be taking my GCSEs at the time. GCSEs, for those that don't know, are exams that we would take at the end of our sophomore year. So instead of having a GPA system, a grade point average system in which it is the average of a combination of your attendance, coursework, midterms, and finals, it would be a case of just doing finals at the end of every 2 or 3 years. And so I was supposed to take these incredibly important exams when suddenly the COVID pandemic hit. Maybe if I'd been a stock trader at the time, I could have made a lot of money, because I thought they would be cancelled from as early as December 2019 / January 2020, because I'd followed the news on it every single day. But so then when the pandemic finally hit and school was cancelled, GCSEs cancelled the same day, there was a big lack of direction for a lot of people. I mean, the school still didn't know if we had to take more exams, so we were still kind of preparing for that. I was very confident in myself at the time. I mean, all of my predicted grades and whatnot were incredibly high. And so I just made the most of the time to really spend time with my family. After the initial lockdown phases came over, it offered a really good opportunity for my family to be able to reconnect. I think with life going on as it had been, we'd all started to go off into different directions. My dad running his business, my mum running hers. My siblings were literally all at different schools. One of my brothers had joined me at boarding school at Eton, and another one had gone to another boarding school, and my sister was at home. But we'd all had this big disconnect, and so it offered us this incredible opportunity for all of us to come back together and become even closer, and as close as we are. And maybe we're even closer today, which was a really positive aspect of a not so nice situation for us and for everyone else around us. It offered me a really good opportunity to get really fit, trained a lot, made the most of that hour or whatever it was outdoors trying to run, and really, get fit and make that change in my life. But when it got to May, my school challenged us to really make the most of the extracurricular side. Again, I will talk about this on my next solo podcast, Um, but one of the things that I think makes Eton so special is not the academics in and of itself, but it's all the other things. It's the extracurriculars, it's the music, it's the societies, it's the sport. And it has this really unique way of doing things that makes Etonians, the people that went to the school, the way they are. And so they even did this in the pandemic by having this thing called the pupil progress form, which would track how many, academic articles we read, business things we did, fitness, um, charity work, entrepreneurial activities, and we put it on this platform. And I got really involved in it, ended up, getting a distinction for it, becoming top in the school with the most amount of points. But one of the main things it did was this community aspect. And the community aspect encouraged every single student at Eton to do some form of community service. And so this looked like, for many, it looked like going on a run, raising a couple £100 for a lot of people raising money for NHS at the time. And so that was what was good for a lot of people. But using the sort of entrepreneurial mindset that I'd talked about before, I thought, why can't I do something that's scalable, that connects people in a world in which we're all apart from each other, and also that enables people to stay fit, and lastly, that raises money for some very important causes. And my boarding house at school had done this thing in which we'd have 3 courts, so 3 various sports, 24 hours with 4 playing each sport. So whether it's tennis, squash, for 24 hours. So we'd have 24 hours of 4 people on a tennis court, 4 people on a squash court, 4 people on a paddle tennis court, whatever. And so I thought, why not take a similar concept, but instead of a day, do it over a week? And instead of defining the sports that people had to do, allow them to choose it for themselves. And then on top of that, instead of just having 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 people, why not have 10, 15 people on it? More often or not, it was 5 to 6 people. And so by having these people from all over the place, they would be able to socialize with each other whilst working out, encouraging good habits, and also raising money for charity. So I created this thing when I was 15. It's called the 168-hour challenge, and it involved a week of hundreds of people from 15 countries, ranging from Australia and New Zealand to America to South Korea to Spain, England, Ireland, and everywhere far and in between, exercising for 160 hours straight, raising money for the NHS, Save the Children, and cancer research. NHS for COVID reasons, cancer research because of my friend Oscar, and Save the Children because my dad said it was the next, it was an amazing charity to help. And having learned a lot more about their work, I'm very glad that I helped them. So that was the sort of preface behind it. I ended up doing that, raising $15,000, £12,000, going to all of these causes. Got hundreds of people, as I said, from 15 different countries. And it really enabled a lot of new people to meet each other and really bond together in a time that had been a very dark place. I also developed my commentating and social media skills, as it was live streamed on YouTube, Twitch, and everything, Instagram, Facebook, and everything in between. But I think it gave me, even though I only slept for perhaps 3 hours a night, it gave me a passion for wanting to make a difference, but also to do things that were scalable, i.e. to not just do a project in which, go for one run and raise £100 or 200, 300 pounds. But if I can get hundreds of people doing something, what greater impact can that happen? And then what's the positive impact, which is raising lots of money for charity. I wanted to make the challenge even harder. So the night before it started, I spoke to my brother, Freddie, who at the time was 13. And I said to him, Freddie, we're going to have to do something hard. What can we do this hard? And we brainstormed, and I thought doing an Ironman would be a good idea. And my brother Freddie thought doing a marathon would be a good idea. And my mum, also a triathlete, she raced for Great Britain and Ireland, was down to do it as well. So my mum decided more sensibly to do an Ironman spaced out across the course of a week. An Ironman, if you don't know what it is, I think it's like a 4-kilometer swim. It's an 180-kilometer bike ride and a marathon on the end. So my mum decided to do that. Myself, I decided to do an Ironman. I had done little to no training. Maybe swam not more than 3 or 4 lengths of a 25-meter pool, so 100 meters. Bike, maybe not done more than 5K. And running, I've done a bit more running, played a lot of sport, but maybe not more than 8K, 8K. And so I decided to do this. Meanwhile, my brother was doing something else, which I'll tell you about in a minute. So I woke up at 3 a.m. I swam in an indoor pool. I swam the whole swim. And then when it came to do the bike ride, I went on an indoor bike, my mum's indoor bike. And I think I managed to do like 100 or 110 kilometers, something ridiculous like that. But by the end of that, my legs had given way, and the bike had also ramped up in difficulty settings. It had broken, and so I decided to stop. My brother, though, did something much more impressive. He decided to run a marathon. And as I said, he was only 13 years of age, which feels even weirder saying it now at the time, now that he's 18. But he ran a marathon, and he did it in less than 4 hours with no training. I'm very happy that he did not have a heart attack in sub 4 hours. And I think it just shows the brilliant athlete that he is today. And so that was that. Following that, eventually get back to school, continuous COVID lockdowns. But we made it through it. So eventually I get back to school. I'm much happier, much healthier. A lot of the jigsaw puzzles of my life had started to come together. I ended up getting involved in a lot of leadership positions in school, leading the society program, leading the entrepreneurship program, the investment society, getting involved in the investment club, leading fundraising, and lots of other things, which you can find on my LinkedIn if you're curious. But I decided to start applying and looking at my next steps to universities. And the norm had been to apply to UK, but I decided to go to the US. So why look at the US? So in the past, historically, it's always been that Oxford and Cambridge have been and still are the best universities on the planet. But the problem is due to wanting to take more people of different backgrounds, they've decided to take less kids from schools such as Eton. In fact, I think this is a statistic that 93% of kids in the UK go to state schools, so publicly funded schools, and only 7% go to private schools. But yet 20% of Oxford and Cambridge are from private schools and 80% from public schools. And so I think the goal, from my perspective, my uninformed perspective, has been that they're trying to narrow the gap and get this as close to 93 and 7% possible. Whilst I think this is amazing in trying to give as many people opportunities as possible, I think there's been a big brain drain in the UK, because if I think about the most intelligent 20 to 30, 40 kids from my year, bar a few exceptions, of course, they have all gone to Harvard, Princeton, Yale, Stanford, Duke. In fact, I am the only non-scholar from my year at Eton out of 5 kids that was a scholar and went to my university, Duke. I mean, it's just absolutely mental. I get the point of trying to help people, and I always think that providing people with opportunities is an incredible thing to do. But when you are losing, quite literally, some of the smartest kids on the planet, kids that would win Child Genius, kids that would have and have won the top academic competitions on the planet, kids that are now building multi-million-dollar businesses at the age of 20, kids that are going to work at the best hedge funds in the world, being the leaders in finance, and will go on to become the prime minister, to become the ambassador to X country, to become the CEO or actor or whatnot. To lose them to another country purely out of some political interest just doesn't make any sense to me. And I'm sure many of you have your own opinions on that. That's my opinion on the matter, is why would you risk losing quite literally the best talent in your country? But due to that reason, amongst a few others, I decided to apply to the US. On top of that, they have a liberal arts system. I have friends that went to school to universities in the UK, such as Loughborough, and thought, hey, I'm going to study economics. Absolutely hated economics. And then they thought to themselves, oh, what am I going to do? I want to study geography. And instead of schools at universities like Loughborough allowing them to switch course, they would make them stop halfway in their year, either finish the year doing a course they're not interested in and give them no credit for it, or have to reapply. So there would be no versatility in major when, as an 18-year-old, I had no idea what I wanted to study. For other reasons, I much prefer the weather in the US. I also think there's a mindset difference, which I've talked about before, Because I think from my perspective, people in the US are much more open to opportunities, to business, to ambition, and wanting to try things. Even in my own life, when I've started my own ventures and I try and do things, people always worry about the what if or no, or what will happen if this, or why should you try, or you're trying too hard, or you're doing this. Whereas in the US, every sort of thing that I try to do or build are very much praise. It's how can I help? Who can I connect you to? What can I do? And this sort of mindset of wanting to build and grow and help each other versus the more restrictive mindset that I've experienced in the UK was another important reason. And lastly, aside from the Oxford and Cambridge point, I feel that there are more universities, in my opinion, of that sort of caliber. I mean, you've got the Ivy Leagues, you've got Duke, you've got Stanford, MIT, Berkeley, and way more that are of that incredibly world-class standard. And so that's what I wanted, and hence why I went to the US. I think what would be helpful to talk about as well was the sort of things I was going through during that year. So as I said, I got very involved in the school, but I sort of got too involved in that. I sort of burnt myself out. I mentioned prior when I started at Eton, there's the jack of all trades, master of none. And although that had worked for me growing up, trying to be the best at everything, it certainly didn't help me when I went to Eton. Well, unless you specialize in something, it's impossible to be the best, because purely out of hours spent on something, you're going to be better. I think I remember watching a video with Kobe Bryant, in which he was basically saying, like, if you can spend double the amount of hours, playing basketball as someone else, that you might not be better than at the start, but if you're playing double the amount of basketball as someone else, you're very likely going to get better than them. And so if you have that passion or you have that skill or thing you want to improve on, unless you are devoting that time, almost obsessive nature to it, it is unlikely that you are going to get better at it, or at least become the best at it, which was a goal for me. But the problem was, because I was doing so many different things, so many different sports and activities and music, and as well as academics, and trying to get into a world-class university, I really burnt myself out. And I don't think burnout is something that people talk about enough. And I don't think I really understood what it was. And I'm not a medical professional, so please don't hold me to this. But in terms of like symptoms of what I felt, whilst my mum had been terminally ill, and that came back, is I stopped the ability to be able to think straight. I had mass decision fatigue. I stopped being able to feel emotions properly. I eventually stopped being able to use the gym and train. My body was my mind had been going so fast for so long that I could no longer be able to do anything. And I think it's something really important that we don't talk about enough, because if you don't look after your both physical and mental health, your body will just give up on you. And this might not be in the form of burnout, but it could be in the form of, a heart attack or something else much more serious. I think something else which I've talked about in an interview with Jonathan Mooney, and in some other interviews, is me having ADHD and dyslexia. I don't know if you've noticed a lot of my twitching or ways of acting on podcasts, and there are only a few of the symptoms of it. But I think it's nice to know that maybe me or other people, or some of the high performing people that you listen to on this podcast, do have these, as we like to call them, superpowers. And I think that gives you it enables you to have the realization that not everyone thinks like you. And and also on top of that, that there are people that think differently like you. And hopefully that can give you some confidence. So as I said, I'd always performed pretty well at school, getting pretty good grades, and even on spelling tests done pretty well. It had taken me a long time to learn how to spell words, but my teachers never picked up on it, because I'd spend 3 hours sometimes trying to learn 10 words. And so just by, sheer force, it enabled me to get past that. And I think if I had known that I did have dyslexia at the time, it maybe would have been a lot harder for me, because I would have justified it in my mind. Oh, hey, I think different. I shouldn't know how to spell it, so I don't have to. Whereas because I thought I'm smart, I can do this. Oh, I have to do this. Or, every other kid is doing it. Why can't I? I just forced myself to it, which ended up working out. And it was only when I was 14 and my younger siblings started to have more obvious signs of dyslexia that I got tested and found out I had it as well. In terms of ADHD, I didn't find out I had ADHD until 18. So again, completely did not know anything about it. I think it's much more, there are much more diagnosed cases of it in America than in the UK. and it's something that teachers are a lot less informed of. And so if I'm not really informed of it and I have it, how can the people around me really be informed on it? And then not only be informed and know that I have it, but also be able to educate me in the best way possible. And so I think that's been a constant like struggle growing up, is both being able to learn properly, but also being able to be understood. I always realized and knew that I thought differently. But at least in that now I know that I do, and being able to use that to do creative things like this are ways that I want to continue moving forward. That kind of like touches the most of the literal, like, what have I done on a surface level and who am I? I wanted to talk a little bit about like my philosophy and like who I am and on the inside and like where I'm trying to get to. I have placed a big bet on social media, and you might notice in a lot of interviews I seem to bring up social media the whole time. And you might thinking that on this sort of personal growth built podcast, why am I bringing up social media so much? Well, I think social media has been, but will continue to be, if not even stronger, the forepoint of many of our lives. I remember being, when I was 10, 11, 12, 13, starting that reselling business that I mentioned. I actually used to make YouTube channels at the same time. It was called Bracken Clothing, and every week I would say the clothes that were coming out that week. And I think this piece of clothing is going to do well, et cetera, et cetera. And I had it, and I told this story before, but I'll tell it again. And I had this clothing, I had this thing, this YouTube channel. I had 50 subscribers, and I absolutely loved it. Be able to share it and just talk about what I absolutely love. And a few months later, I arrive at Eton, and I'm with my newfound friends in the boarding house, and we log into this game in which you needed a Gmail email to log in. And so I log in with my email, and the name comes up, Bracken Clothing. And the kids around me asked innocently, like, "Oh, Harvey's your YouTube channel?" And immediately I was so insecure and upset about it that I instantly thought I had to get rid of it. So I sprinted up to my room and deleted perhaps 100 videos, like permanently gone, not hidden, but deleted off my YouTube channel. And straight away after I did that, I was really upset because I'd let the insecurity of what people might think about me rather than, what people think about me or might think about me, rather than what I thought about and thought about myself and thought about who I wanted to be. But I still realized that social media was such a powerful asset. I just didn't know how to put myself in front of a camera and how to share my passions and really get myself out there without being insecure. Following that, I've had various TikToks, but again, like, would take them down when people were insecure. But this medium seems to work well for me, and is more justified in people's minds around me, in that I'm learning from people that have done far greater things than myself and than them, at least at this point in time. And so it seems reasonable to have this form of medium in order to speak to people. So that's how I've dealt with it. But I still think I would encourage you to build your social media accounts. I've always thought that if you're not deciding your personal brand is decided for you. My dad's actually building something called The Draft, which I'll go into more detail on another time. Perhaps even try and interview him if he's interested, and tell you a bit more about that, because that's really delving into the idea of building your personal brand, which in 2024 is hands down one of the most important things that you can do. But we're in this world of increasing political divisiveness. I mean, as I said, I'm in North Carolina. I'm studying at Duke University right now. And even on a college campus, something that would usually be seen as more left-leaning, there's a lot of like angst and like divisiveness between if people are in the norm of what they believe that people should be, whether it's people on the right, Republicans, or people on the left, Democrats. If you're not in either of these buckets, people are incredibly horrible to each other. And it's, something that I was very fortunate to have at school, with people of all economic backgrounds, all races, religions, of all opinions, is this concept of debating, not critiquing the person, but critiquing the debate. And at the end, when you finish debating and saying your point towards the other person, you go back to being friends or classmates, but you don't hold a grudge against them. And that opinion is not fixed to that person. In fact, if all my opinions that I've ever had were part of my personality and technique, I would both be upset. But on top of that, I wouldn't have a sense of self, because a lot of the opinions that I previously had are now adapted as I've taken on new information and new ways of seeing things. And I think that's the only real way you can grow. And so I've noticed, I mean, even with, Donald Trump and Kamala Harris right now, one goes on one podcast, one goes on another podcast. They're not looking at each other face to face, and both are complaining about, what's right and what's wrong with each other. And I think that sets a really bad example for the rest of people in America and throughout the world, in that the leaders of a country can just, shout at each other and complain the media is wrong, or this is wrong and this is wrong, without getting to the heart of the problem and actually debating things and be willing to, to debate. And so we can create our own understandings about things. And so that's something I really want to have as a core principle of this podcast, is this idea that I'm not always going to be right. And even in this podcast, things that I've said are probably wrong. But I think it's that willingness to be able to put myself out there and to learn from these people that will enable me to develop my own opinions and for you to develop yours. Another thing I mentioned is that I want to become one of the world's best. What does that look like? I have no idea, but I'm trying to put myself in situations in which I can become one of the world's best. I'm very hardworking. I'm training my ass off to become as fit as I possibly can, to learn as much as I can, both academically and in my broader life. Stuff like I have a cold shower every day. I try and listen to the great people that I talked about at the start. I have lunches and dinners with students on campus pretty much every day, trying to learn their perspectives. I speak to new professors. I speak to new podcast guests from all different fields. So I think that's really what I'm trying to get to. I think another additive point feeds into the idea of the personal brand, is that as AI, as all these we have a further digitalization, Web 3.0, Web 28, it doesn't matter what it is. As we keep developing what we think is development, but maybe we're going backwards, but what we think is technological development, I think, in my opinion, the only thing that we can truly have that makes us better than AI or better than technology or any form of automation that might replace us is ourselves. No one can better be Harvey or Julia or Harry or David or Louise than you. You are the only person that can be better at being yourself. And I think that's what's nice about social media, is that if framed in the right way, you can be even better at being yourself. This doesn't mean you have to quit your job and spend all time making meme videos or prank videos. But things like LinkedIn, things like what's going to be the draft when it's released, allow you to be your more authentic self, push yourself out there, not just to gain following and make it your job, but also to build communities. I recently did a podcast with Josh Perry, which will probably be released after this episode, in which we talked about the idea of physical communities being broken down. I mean, it used to be you'd live in a situation in which you'd have your parents and your grandparents and great grandparents, and you all probably lived from the same area. You'd have other people in their and all their lineage in one area. Whereas now we're all spread out all over the country. And in my case, my family is all over the world now. But what we do have is this digital connection to connect both with each other. So I'm connected to my family and my friends from home and here online. But also there's this an ability to connect with people, like-minded people from all over the world. So you're no longer restricted by where can I get to in the next hour or day or week, but I can speak to anyone in the world instantaneously. That's why this podcast, I'm able to speak to such amazing people. And I would encourage you to do the same, whether it's a more career focused or business focused element, or whether it's passion, whether it's Pokemon cards, or whether it's stocks, or whether it's dolphins. Find those people, create content, or write messages or forums, or reach out to people to learn. I think there's so much more that I could go into, and so many more topics I don't want to hit. And I'm sure you listening to this, if you got through this far, will have your own thoughts of what you want me to talk about, or own debates, or things you do agree or disagree with me on. The last thing that I want to mention, because it's probably releasing this week, is a charity that my family and I have started in memory of my mum. So this is called the Lulu Racing Foundation. It's named after my mum, Louise Mary Martha Bracken-Smith. Lulu is a name that many of her friends and my dad love to call her. So Lulu Racing Foundation. As I mentioned, my mum, in her 40s, she was a businesswoman who became a triathlete in age group racing for Ireland. And she loved sport. And she also loved being able to help those that need it most. In her business, I sometimes wonder, like, your business is, she ran an accountancy business. You can hire the best people with the best grades and whatnot. But oftentimes my mum would decide to hire someone that had made a mistake in the past or that really needed an opportunity or whatever. And I always thought to myself, like, Mum, this doesn't make any business sense. But she really both loved this idea of giving back and helping people. But I think what was probably the bigger overlaying thing was that she saw opportunity in people that maybe didn't see it in themselves. People that not just, want to do something and get better, but people that had real opportunity to become world-class people. She would help develop them and enable them to become the best they can be. But not only the best they can be, but the world's best, like phenomenal in their roles. And I think that's what we want to accomplish with the Lulu Racing Foundation, particularly starting out in Jersey and the Channel Islands and then throughout the rest of the UK and beyond, is taking athletes that have the ability, aka if you gave them the right connections, the right coaching and or the monetary ability to become that world-class triathlete, to become that World Cup winning football player or rugby player or swimmer, that if we gave them those resources, that they would become that, whilst also being able to build up the grassroots, get the attention over that sport, particularly in women's sport, things like netball and cricket, really building that up to enabling those athletes to become the best they can be. And so I wanted to mention that. You're very welcome to donate if the page is up and running at the time, but also to follow it. I think it's exciting to have people to know that are following their dreams, both so you can follow their journey, but most importantly to inspire you to, start your own thing, whether it's in sport or beyond. I was thinking about fully scripting this video and having, say this and say this and say this, and there's probably a billion topics that I didn't cover in this podcast. But I hope that in this podcast, as all over the places it was, you can at least somewhat get the essence of who Harvey Joseph Peter Bracken-Smith really is. And if there's something I've learned, that what's so great about meeting people is either you like them and great, you can continue listening to them, working with them, connecting them, or you don't like them. And so I am just one of 7, nearly 8 billion people on the planet that you no longer have to talk to or avoid. I hope that I am nearing towards the like side, but if I'm not, then I wish you the best with everything you have going forward. I am a work in progress. If I wasn't a work in progress, I probably wouldn't have this podcast. I probably wouldn't be at Duke, and I'd probably be a multi-trillionaire with unlimited money, no problems. I'd probably have, everything sorted out. But I don't. I will never have, and I never pretend to be. But what I do have is this burning desire to be better, to get better, and to build an amazing community of people full of love and joy and motivation, determination, and hard work, to be the best they can be and truly try and live out my mother's legacy. I really, really appreciate if you've got to this point in the podcast. If you have any ideas for guests, of people you want me to speak to, of topics you want me to cover, please let me know. I really want to grow at this platform, this community, and learn as much as I can, both for myself and for you, and really eventually grow this into a community of like-minded people who are also trying to become the best that they can be, and grow this into a physical community so that we can all do that in our own lives. I really appreciate you taking the time, and thank you so much. Have an awesome day, night, or whatever you're doing listening to this. And please subscribe, follow Personable on all platforms, and leave a comment. Let me know what you think, what you thought, what you enjoyed, what you didn't enjoy. It always helps me. And, even maybe give a comment about yourself and what you're interested in, and, put your social handles and see if other people want to connect with you in the comments. But look after yourselves, stay safe, and be the best that you could be.